This story takes France as an example, but what you're about to read could happen almost anywhere. Every government, in every era, finds subtle ways to take what belongs to its people. The method changes. The result never does. Camille is 47. She works in logistics, the kind of job that demands precision, not glory. For 20 years, she's saved patiently, cutting corners, saying no to small luxuries so that tomorrow might be easier. Now she has 130,000 euros to her name, a quiet fortune built from 2 decades of effort. Her money sits neatly divided, 50,000 in a savings account guaranteed by the state, 60,000 in a life insurance plan labeled secure, 20,000 in fixed-term deposits with no risk. On paper, it looks safe, solid, sensible. Camille believes what millions believe, that the system protects her, that the rules are fair, that the guarantees mean something. But numbers can lie in polite ways. Camille doesn't know the real figures, the ones buried in official reports and whispered between economists. Her country, like most modern nations, is drowning in public debt. Over 70% of its annual output already consumed by promises made long ago. Interest payments rising faster than education budgets, deficits widening like cracks in a dam. Every year the state borrows more than it earns, and when taxes can't keep up, it reaches for invisible tools, quiet mechanisms that drain value without anyone noticing. In total, there are 5 of them, 5 levers of control, 5 ways governments slowly turn citizens' savings into their own survival fund. The first weapon is inflation. It's the softest form of theft, the kind that doesn't break locks or enter homes. It simply changes the meaning of money itself. When a government spends beyond its means, it issues bonds. Central banks then buy those bonds with money created from nothing. New currency floods the economy, chasing the same goods. Prices rise. The illusion of prosperity hides the erosion beneath. Your salary stays the same, but what it buys shrinks. Your savings stay untouched, but their power melts. Meanwhile, the state pays back its debt in a cheaper currency, one devalued by design. It's an elegant trap. In Weimar Germany in the early 1920s, 1 trillion marks ended up worth a single US dollar. Chaos opened the door to extremism. Economists call it the most silent tax in history. Even today, inflation quietly drains entire nations of wealth. It's estimated that in many advanced economies, it erodes around 5% of the national income each year. Money pulled straight from savers' pockets without a single vote or headline. Camille feels this in small, invisible ways. Her savings account earns 2.4% interest. Inflation runs at 4 or 5. She loses roughly 1,000 to 2,500 euros of purchasing power every year, simply for keeping her money safe. Her work, her time, her sacrifice, all quietly burned by the slow fire of policy. But when inflation alone isn't enough, governments move to Plan B. They call it financial repression, a polite phrase for forcing citizens to fund public debt at a loss. Through complex rules and regulations, banks are required to buy government bonds labeled risk-free by complicit authorities. Insurance companies must invest heavily in the same debt. Future pension funds are tied by law to these instruments. Every regulation pushes private savings toward public deficits. Your money becomes a life raft for a sinking ship. Between the mid-1940s and the late 1970s, this system allowed many Western governments to cut their debt in half, not by paying it back, but by quietly transferring the cost to citizens. Savers were punished with low or even negative returns, while the state thrived. As economist Bruno Berthez once said, negative rates mean those who have money are penalized, and those who owe are rewarded. In such a world, logic itself turns upside down. Prudence becomes weakness. Waste becomes strategy. Camille's 60,000 euros in life insurance, bound by regulation to invest half its capital in government debt, loses between 1,200 and 1,800 euros a year in real terms. She doesn't notice at first. The statements still show growth. But that growth is paper thin, eaten from the inside by inflation and low yields. And when citizens start looking for escape routes, moving money abroad, converting to other assets, governments reach for their third lever: capital control. This is the moment when fear replaces freedom. In times of crisis, states limit withdrawals, restrict transfers, and criminalize the movement of private wealth. It happened in Greece in the mid-2010s. Withdrawals capped at €60 a day for years. It happened in Iceland after the financial collapse of 2008, capital controls lasting nearly a decade. When panic hits, borders close faster than airports. The tools are already in place everywhere. Taxes on those who change residence, obligations to declare every account abroad, caps on cash payments, automatic monitoring of large transfers. At the push of a button, thresholds can drop and financial mobility becomes a crime. Camille doesn't know it yet, but if she ever tries to move her savings to a foreign bank for safety, she'll face a 30% exit tax, mandatory declarations, and limits on physical cash. She owns her money, but she can no longer use it freely. That's how ownership turns into illusion. It's not about losing your wealth, it's about losing access to it. And yet, governments are prepared to go even further. When inflation, repression, and control no longer suffice, they invoke the fourth lever, the bail-in. It sounds technical, but it's brutally simple. When a bank fails, depositors, not taxpayers, pay the price. In Cyprus in the early 2010s, nearly half of deposits over €100,000 were confiscated overnight. Similar mechanisms exist now across the world under different names. They allow banks to recapitalize themselves with customers' funds. It's the institutionalization of theft, legalized under the banner of stability. Camille's money, spread across 3 banks, is exposed to this very risk. If the system collapses under the weight of public debt, as it has before, her losses could range from 30 to 50,000 euros, all in the name of saving the system. And then, when even that isn't enough, governments reach for the final weapon, the tax on savings. But that's another story, one darker still. The last lever is the harshest of all, the tax on savings. When every other method has been used up, when inflation has dulled its edge and repression no longer fills the gap, governments take the direct route. They tax virtue itself. They call it a solidarity contribution, a temporary effort, a fair adjustment. But the meaning never changes. Those who saved will pay for those who did not. A fraction of wealth, 0.5% here, 1% there, quietly withdrawn under the banner of necessity. And once the principle is accepted, the numbers only rise. Camille watches the announcements on television. New levies on idle capital, proposals to raise inheritance duties, whispers about an extraordinary tax on excess savings. Each word is wrapped in moral language. The rich must contribute, the comfortable must share, everyone must help fund recovery. But behind the slogans hides the same old truth. It is easier to tax what already exists than to build something new. For Camille, the arithmetic is cruel. On her €130,000, a progressive levy of just 2 to 4% would eat away thousands every year. Not for risk, not for choice, but simply for having done the responsible thing, for having saved. Across decades, history repeats this pattern. In the early 1980s, new wealth taxes drove billions in capital out of several European nations. Hundreds of thousands of jobs vanished with them. Yet politicians learned nothing. Each crisis revives the same idea, dressed in new rhetoric, promising justice, delivering stagnation. By now, the trap is complete. Inflation erodes, repression binds, controls imprison, bail-ins confiscate, and taxation punishes. Each lever feeds the next until private wealth becomes public resource. The illusion of choice fades. But not everyone remains powerless. Camille, once trusting and still cautious, begins to see the pattern. The numbers, the rules, the quiet reshuffling of responsibility, all pointing in one direction. She understands that the only true safety lies beyond borders, beyond single systems, beyond the reach of one government's panic. She starts to act while she still can. First, she diversifies. A portion of her savings goes into tangible assets, physical gold stored abroad, not in paper promises, but in real metal. It will not pay dividends, but it will not vanish with a policy change. Another part moves into decentralized digital currencies. Volatile perhaps, but outside traditional control. Next, she opens an account in another jurisdiction governed by different laws, not to hide, but to balance. She learns that every nation's safety net is also a leash, and that spreading risk is an act of prudence, not rebellion. Camille studies the legal frameworks that others ignore. Some investment vehicles in neutral countries protect clients from domestic seizures. Some life insurance contracts, structured in Luxembourg or Singapore, are shielded by international treaties. By mastering the rules instead of fearing them, she begins to turn the game back on itself. She also learns restraint. She keeps her regulated local accounts small, just enough to avoid drawing attention, but never enough to become a hostage of national policy. She places certain holdings under a family trust, making them harder to tax arbitrarily. She uses every legal opening still available, every unclosed door in the bureaucratic labyrinth. This is not rebellion. It is adaptation. Because Camille knows that when a system begins to feed on its citizens, survival becomes a private responsibility. The lesson reaches beyond her story. Every saver in every developed nation faces the same equation. When public debt soars beyond 100% of economic output, when deficits double official limits, confiscation becomes mathematics, not politics. The form may differ: a temporary solidarity levy in one place, a wealth contribution in another. But the substance is identical. Governments rarely announce they are seizing wealth. They call it stability, reform, modernization. Yet the result is the same: the silent transfer of value from the prudent to the powerful. Camille no longer believes in guarantees. She believes in structure. She no longer trusts promises. She trusts diversification. She has learned that the paper saying your deposit is insured up to 100,000 euros is worth less than the ink it's printed with when the insurer is bankrupt. So she builds her own insurance. Her assets now span countries, currencies, and laws. Real estate in one, metals in another, cash flow in a third. She invests in forests, farmland, and art, things that hold value even when numbers collapse. She favors the tangible over the virtual, the real over the theoretical, the substance over the story. It isn't about greed, it's about dignity. When the next crisis comes, and it will, she won't have to beg for access to her own labor. She will still hold something that cannot be frozen by decree, because what the state cannot print, it cannot devalue. What it cannot seize, it cannot destroy. The coming storm is not French, it is global. Every central bank, every treasury, every finance ministry balances on the same edge: too much debt, too little growth, too many promises. The tools they use are the same ones Camille has now learned to recognize: inflation as anesthetic, regulation as control as cure, confiscation as policy. And yet, history shows another constant truth. Each time the system overreaches, a few people step aside early, reading the signs others ignore. They become the survivors, the ones who still have something left when the dust settles. Camille's story is not about escape. It's about awareness, about seeing through the slogans before they harden into laws, about understanding that financial security is never given. It is built, protected, and defended by knowledge. In the end, money is more than currency. It's condensed freedom, the ability to act, to move, to choose. When that freedom is trapped, life itself narrows. Governments may control the flow of funds, but they cannot control the will to prepare. They can close borders, but not minds. They can tax wealth, but not foresight. Camille acts before the gates close. She diversifies, decentralizes, and defends what she has earned. She chooses awareness over denial, movement over paralysis, realism over faith. And when the next economic storm hits, whether in Paris, Berlin, New York, or Tokyo, she will not be watching helplessly as screens go dark. She will already be on higher ground, because the real defense is not hidden in offshore accounts or gold vaults. It begins in the mind and in understanding the game before you are forced to play it. In the end, every citizen must choose. Wait until the system decides for you, or act while choice still exists. Camille has chosen. And history, once again, will decide who was awake when the lights began to flicker.